Hello over the peak. It's been a long, hard week, so I'll try and be short and concise today. First, Telegraph. Bundesbank questions the legality of the EU bailouts. The Bundesbank is the German central bank, still operating. Germany's Bundesbank has issued a blistering critique of EU bailout policies, warning that the Eurozone is drifting towards a debt union without democratic legitimacy or treaty backing. So that's the German central bank saying that the European Union bailout policies are drifting towards debt union without democratic legitimacy or treaty backing. Similar, next day in the Telegraph, we get Germany fires cannon across Europe's bow. German President, Angela Merkel is the Chancellor, German President Christian Wulff has accused the European Central Bank of violating its treaty mandate with the mass purchase of Southern European bonds. To me, on the analogy that I've been running this week, that's phoning from the club and getting through to the ECB, looking after the children and saying, no, I told no sweets, don't give them any sweets. Yeah, I've got to go. Do you really think this lot have got their shit together? I don't. Over in the United States of America, New York Times, the opinion pages, it's a flawed settlement. The Obama administration has turned up the heat on Eric Schneiderman, New York's Attorney General, to go along with the proposed settlement with the nation's largest banks over dubious foreclosure practices. Mr. Schneiderman should stand his ground in not supporting the deal, says the opinion pages of the New York Times. The administration says that a settlement would quickly deliver much-needed relief to hard-pressed borrowers, but it's doubtful it would provide redress on par with the bank's wrongdoing or borrowers' needs. Next day, Schneiderman removed from National Foreclosure Settlement Committee. New York Attorney General Eric Schneiderman was removed from the executive committee negotiating a nationwide foreclosure settlement with U.S. banks on Tuesday. Iowa Attorney General Tom Miller said Schneiderman was off the committee effective immediately because New York had worked to undermine the group's efforts. Schneiderman opposes any settlement that would result in the halting of criminal and civil investigations of fraudulent business practices by the banks that he has been pursuing separately. He'll probably wake up with a horse's head on his bed next. That's the way they seem to do business in America. Talking about doing business in America, over the long term, what happens when monetary and fiscal policy hits the wall? In 1978, Congress passed the Full Employment and Balanced Growth Act, which in effect expanded the reach of Congress beyond the use of just fiscal policy. The primary objective of the Act, also known as the Humphrey-Hawkins Bill, was to add a second mandate to the Federal Reserve's policy goals. In addition to conducting monetary policy to achieve price stability, the Act directed the Fed to strive for full employment. During the last 30 years, policymakers have attempted to use a combination of monetary and fiscal policy to mitigate the natural ebb and flow of the business cycle. In the 25 years between 1957 and 1982, there were 64 months that the economy was in recession. That was 57 to 82, 64 months that the economy was in recession. Then we got the Humphrey Hawkins bill, and in the 25 years between 1982 and 2007, there were only 2 shallow recessions. What efficacy? How was it achieved? Chart 5b. I've marked the 57 to 82 in the middle there at the bottom, and the 82 to 2007, the 2007 marks up there in the top right. Total credit market debt as a percentage of GDP. That's the way to do it. The little anthill on the left was the run-up to the Great Depression, and the other side of the anthill was the Great Depression. Ezra Klein, second use of Ezra Klein this week. It's the household debt, stupid. Ken Rogoff wants to call our economic malaise the Great Contraction. Richard Posner wants to call it a depression. I tend to dismiss arguments over semantics, but in this case I agree. If it were up to me, we would call it a household debt crisis. If it was up to me, I'd call it something similar as well. Stephen Roche, superstar. The over-indebted American consumer will be hard-pressed to simultaneously reduce debt and maintain levels of consumption that support economic growth. On CNBC, linked by me yesterday on Twitter, Stephen Roach of Morgan Stanley says we need ways to forgive the excess of mortgage, installment and revolving credit as was done in the 1930s. That will help consumers get through the pain of deleveraging sooner rather than later. There are 4 ways to reduce real debt burdens. 1. By paying down debts via accumulated savings. I don't think people know how to accumulated save anymore. 2. By inflating away the value of money. I think the fiscal and monetary policy people might give that a stab, just to help things along. 3. By reneging in part or full on the promise to repay by defaulting. 4. By reneging in part on the promise to repay through debt forgiveness. Listening to Roach explain the conundrum of high unemployment and poor wages gains juxtaposed with high debt, it is clear he recognizes there is zero chance that consumers will be able to support the kind of economic growth via deleveraging and accumulating savings that avoids a deflationary outcome. The macro backdrop for consumers is deflationary. So what will the authorities do? Let's go back to this. During the last 30 years, policymakers have attempted to use a combination of monetary and fiscal policy to mitigate the natural ebb and flow of the business cycle. What do you think they're going to do? Do you think they're going to break a habit of 30 years this year, next year? It takes a long time to get into a rut of doing things. And when you're in that rut, it's very, very hard to get out. But that rut that the monetary authorities have got into has also got the consumer. 30 years ago, we weren't consumers, we were people. But now we're consumers in debt, in a rut, and that's where we're going to stay. Have a good week. End. See you next week. Bye.